This is going to be a very exciting webinar today, talking about the evolution of vertical farming technology. And today's webinar is sponsored by Montel, and we'll talk a little bit more about Montel later on. But today we're really going to dive into the topic of vertical farming and its growth over the past decade or more, and where it's going next with an incredible set of panelists. So just a little bit of a Zoom etiquette. Please introduce yourself in our group channel. Tell us who you are. Tell us where you're tuning in from. But another thing you can do is you can set an intention, right? What are you hoping to learn today? What are your objectives for attending this webinar? Make sure that you maximize that and get the most benefit out of it. So think about what you want to learn today, what you want to gain from it. Of course, we have the Q&A feature. You can see that with the two chat bubbles and Q&A. This is the place where you can ask any questions to the panelists. Panelists can answer those questions directly in writing, or at the end, we have 15 minutes of time for Q&A, which we will answer live. So we'll select some of those questions to answer live, and we really welcome the questions. It's an important part of these webinars, so don't hesitate to ask them. So there we go. We've got about 100 people online already. We're very excited about that, and thank you so much for joining today's webinar. So I'll just kick things off a little bit. And again, please introduce yourself. We'd love to hear from you, who you are, and prepare your questions as well. So vertical farming is majorly exciting, right? It's just gained so much interest, and there's been so much growth in the technologies behind it, from the lighting to the racking to the climate control to automation. There's been so many shifts over time in the past decade that we've really seen vertical farming grow. However, there's still a lot of questions about crop diversity, sustainability, and the economics of these farms. So we have lots to talk about as far as how it's evolved and where it's going next. And so today we've selected a curated group of panelists covering different topics like genetics, energy, etc. And we're going to be talking about those topics and hearing their take on where the industry is, where the technology is, and where it could go. Gordon-Smith, I'm the founder and CEO of Agritecture. T-shirts coming soon on our swag store on Instagram. But Agritecture is a global services company helping to design and plan controlled environment agriculture facilities around the world, 40 countries to date so far. And we also have a software product called Agritecture Designer, where you can calculate estimates for the key economic and environmental factors of greenhouses or vertical farms anywhere in the world. That's Agritecture Designer. But of course, that's not all. Agritecture is known for producing content. We've been blogging for a decade. You heard that right. Over a decade, we've been blogging and writing content and producing webinars about this very exciting topic of vertical farming and greenhouses and urban agriculture. So it's a great pleasure to be here. We're so happy that all of you have joined. And again, we really want you to introduce yourself, and we want you to think about questions so you can engage our incredible panelists today. So let's begin with James Eves from VaultServer. How are you doing, James?
Sorry about that. I'm great, Henry. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. It's good to know that you know how to use the mute button correctly. That's a sign of a good panelist. So James, tell us briefly who you are, what your background is, and tell us briefly about VaultServer.
I'm an agricultural economist. I was a university professor for 20 years, and I studied the economics of growing in different controlled environments like greenhouses and indoor farms. And really, I joined VaultServer. They invented a way to distribute high voltage power throughout large facilities using low voltage wiring techniques, basically using Ethernet wiring techniques. So it dramatically lowers the cost and improves efficiency of distributing lots of power and buildings like vertical farms. And so they hired me to help build their CEA products.
Awesome. Sounds like an exciting disruption to the way the energy is supplied throughout these facilities. So we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts on energy and the evolution of vertical farming as well coming up later. So if you've been in the sector as long as I have, you're definitely going to recognize industry veteran Dan Albert, who is now working at Unfold. Dan, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Henry. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to see you again and to have you here and to talk about your new role. You've kind of done multiple different things across the sector. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and a brief hint at Unfold?
Yeah, sure, of course. So again, my name is Dan Albert. I started my career in the design and architecture industry. I was bit by the local food bug vertical farming kind of idea very early on. And I started a business called Farmbox Greens in Seattle. It was a vertical farm that grew microgreens. That business scaled and was acquired by a large produce company and is still operating today. I spent about 7 years working on that. And when COVID hit, I took that opportunity to step away. It was a point where my family needed some attention and 2 young kids, and stepped out from the company that I built. And Unfold had launched that year with the idea of selling seeds into the vertical farming space. And I was really excited with that kind of concept. And so I came on board with Unfold in the fall of 2020 and have been helping them to build up an R&D facility in Davis, California. And then also I work sort of as a liaison, knowing the growing side, knowing what's important, but also trying to link that to our genetics, breeding, and digital endeavors at Unfold. So I kind of have multiple different hats, a lot of experience, and I'm excited to share some ideas today.
And talk more about breeding, a very key, exciting innovation that's going to change a lot of things, I think, for this sector. So next up, we have Eric Grozik. How are you doing, Eric?
Hi, thanks, Henry. Doing well.
Where are you calling in from today?
I'm in North Andover, Massachusetts. My company Zordi is setting up a R&D facility here. I'm the head of operations. Prior to this, I was a program manager at Plenty. I also worked at Local Bounty, where I was director of production. Most of my career has been focused on implementing, operationalizing automation, and different engineering equipment into grow environments and production spaces.
Okay, well, fantastic. We've got a lot of different perspectives here, and we're really grateful for all of your time. Again, welcome to all of our attendees. You're welcome to use the Q&A feature to ask questions at any time in the webinar, and we will have space to answer them later on. And of course, thank you to our sponsors, Montel, for making today's webinar possible. Now let's dive in. What we're going to do is we're going to sort of go around and hear from these 3 different experts about their perspectives on vertical farming, the evolution of the technology, but also their particular areas of focus. So to begin with, we're going to start off with you, James. And again, I want to sort of talk a little bit more about when you first started studying CEA intensively. You predicted that these vertical farms would eventually outcompete greenhouses, which is a pretty bold prediction, and I think a controversial one. So tell us a bit more, what was behind this prediction, and how far away do you think we are from that being realistic?
Yeah, if you think it was a controversial prediction today, imagine 7 years ago. So when we started doing this research. So we started doing research about 7 years ago, and the prediction is based on 2 things. There's an operational reason, but there's also this reason that's even more important related to the innovation process. The operational reason is related to the trade-off, that fundamental trade-off between growing indoors in a vertical farm versus growing in a greenhouse. People grow in greenhouses because their objective is to offset the cost of lighting, both the electricity bill, but also the expensive distribution costs of distributing power in that facility by using what, quote unquote, the free light of the sun. But in fact, sunlight isn't free. It's a trade-off. There's other costs you have to incur in order to use that sunlight. For instance, you lose control of your internal environment because now you're more subjected to radiation from the sun, but also just the outdoor temperature and level of humidity. So, when you think about that trade-off, when you consider different locations in the world and different crop mixes, that trade-off can imply that it actually is cheaper to grow in a vertical farm. For instance, if you're in a cold, dark place or colder, darker place like Quebec, where I am, a greenhouse will save some light, save some energy from some sunlight, but because there's lots of dark periods, you'll have to supplement, you'll still have to buy lighting and use electricity for supplemental lighting. You'll have to use more space to maintain the same yields, but you're also gonna have to spend a lot of money on energy for heating. And that can apply that in places like this. It's cheaper to actually grow in a vertical farm. Then you have the opposite extreme. If you move to like hot, humid places, now you have the opposite problem. You're receiving so much energy from the sun, you're incurring lots of costs to get rid of that energy. And so in these warm, humid places, you have the same situation where it can be more profitable to grow in a vertical farm. And again, that was 7 years ago. So what's happened since then, because vertical farms have much more electronics, right? Like much more machines, and they're much more dependent on electronics than a greenhouse. That's expensive, but also benefit from things like Moore's Law and just the fact that technology decreases in price over time. Something we've seen with LEDs, which is a major component of the cost of growing in a vertical farm, is that they decrease in price by about 20% every year. So 7 years ago, there were regions where it made sense to grow in vertical farms, but over time, those number of regions is just increasing. And that leads to like this final part of the equation that's actually the most exciting part for me, is the fact that because these are really highly controlled environments, your capacity to learn and innovate is dramatically improved. Like the return on technology, investments in technology is much higher. I'll give you a couple examples, especially since like unfolds here. I think about companies, I think about breeding a lot, breeding programs. And when you're in controlled environments, it's much easier to learn, right? It's much faster to learn because you can do better A/B testing. More controlled environment, I can learn faster. And so I can progress that technology and get a higher return on those investments if I'm learning in a controlled environment, or I'm developing things for a controlled environment. The same thing is true for artificial intelligence, right? Software that we want to use to improve cultivation operation. It's going to be much easier to develop that sort of technology for a controlled space like a vertical farm. So vertical farms are going to be able to leverage all of this decreasing costs of technology and just a more rapid learning to the extent that I think what we're going to see is shortly, even now, is you're going to hit this tipping point where it's going to be like electric cars versus combustion engines. A few years ago, it seemed crazy that electric cars could actually disrupt the engine industry. But now it's like a foregone conclusion. And just because all the value you can create with an electric car and its decreasing costs of technology. So that's basically summarizes that research.
Yeah, thank you for that summary. And certainly, energy is such a huge component of that. And just a few takeaways from your statements that are very important for the audience. Mm-hmm. Context matters. Where your location is going to drive a lot of your decision about a greenhouse versus a vertical farm. And those extreme climates are going to be places where vertical farming will shine a little bit more. And also, I really liked your point about how, because there's so much tech, you could say exponential tech in vertical farms, that growth curve and learning and evolution based on the topic of today's webinar is a lot faster. And I certainly see that from a lot of our investor clients and why they're betting on vertical farms, because they see so much more growth there. So going back to your point though, in Quebec, do you think it's already competitive with greenhouses? You think vertical farms are competitive with greenhouses?
Yeah, I think it's competitive. What I'm surprised by, I think people don't realize it's competitive. I think it's like a few years ago, people are still growing under HPS lights, right? Because they don't realize it's just a lag in information, a lag in transition. And I think that right now for lots of crops in places like Quebec, where energy is not that expensive, it is certainly competitive. And I only think that's going to expand. That area of competitiveness is just going to expand over time.
So obviously Quebec has a kind of an interesting energy mix that might make it more sustainable, but regarding the rest of the world, there's a lot of interest and push, especially from ESG investors and policymakers, about where is the future where there could be net zero CEA. So maybe net zero vertical farming is more of the emphasis for today's webinar, but do you think that's possible? And when do you think we're going to get there, James?
Yeah, I definitely think it's possible. I think it will happen. I think we have to be patient. In the short run, I think there's ways. Well, I'll go to the long run. I mean, in the short run, when we think of net zero, we think of renewable energy, we think of solar. But the challenge with those energy sources is that they can't provide energy 24 hours a day. And often plants grow for more than 10 or 12 or 14 hours a day. And so you really need to store the energy. And the reality right now is like energy storage is about 60 cents per watt hour. And in other words, to put it in context, if you put a solar field in and battery storage, you're basically going to double the cost of your facility, your construction costs. And so that solution's not here yet. In the short run, we have all these these interesting ways of, we can use a lot of solar, right? For 8 hours a day, you could just pump whatever solar you're getting into your farm. Interesting thing, since a racking company is sponsoring this, just well-designed racking, like well-designed, thoughtful racking, can actually shave off between 5 and 10% of your energy expenses by just using light and airflow better. Higher voltage power saves energy. I think just interesting innovations that are going to happen over time as we learn more about the plant. Like something that some people are surprised by is that the plant's use of light during the day fluctuates every few minutes. Every few minutes is rotating between using light and not using light, but we're providing light all the time. There's this great opportunity to reduce our consumption of energy by just using biofeedback and getting to a place where a plant can tell us, I don't need light right now, stop broadcasting or emitting light. So I think that's actually technology that'll help us use sensors to optimize how we deliver light is not that far away. So I think there's lots of interesting solutions that move us closer to net zero. I think, like, for instance, again, I'll just bring up, like I said, I think about breeding a lot. We're gonna
get into breeding in a second.
I know. I don't want to get there, but in terms of energy, the one great innovation I would love to see is just allowing breeding to be more compatible with renewable energy, so we can deliver DLI in shorter amounts of time, the amount to these plants while maintaining quality. So we're not there yet. Battery storage is going to be a huge thing, but there's lots of surprising lower lying fruit ways of getting close to net zero.
Fantastic. Thank you, James. I mean, energy is such a huge part of this sector. Yeah. And appreciate that you setting that all up for us. And if you have questions about energy and vertical farming and the evolution, please drop them in the Q&A chat. James is ready to answer them. So let's move over to you, Dan. For those of us that don't know about the basics of genetics and breeding, maybe you can talk about and introduce Unfold, and what is the hypothesis you're trying to test through this business that's really dedicated to breeding for CEA.
Sure. Thanks for the primer, James. I appreciate that. Breeding is important. Seeds are important. I like to think about it as it's your input stream. And so your quality of your output is in large ways predicated on what you put into it. And so the seed becomes this component of a vertical farm that is, for the first 10 years of vertical farming evolution really hasn't been addressed. It's been discussed, it's an opportunity, but it hasn't been directionalized at a major seed company. And so Unfold was formed with investment from Temasek, which is a Singapore-based investment firm, and a Leaps by Bayer. And effectively what we have is a license agreement in lettuce, spinach, tomato, cucumber, and pepper for those 5 crops to take and bring those into the vertical farming market. Obviously, everyone knows lettuce. And that's the primary crop that we are focusing on. But we also realize that if vertical farms are to truly be successful over time, that there's an evolution of what can be grown within those farms, and the architecture of the facility itself and what is going into it has to be adjusted based on what the product output is. And as you think about various different form factors, growing spinach versus lettuce versus tomatoes, they're very different places. And so what Unfold at its core is trying to do is help farmers be able to bring more of those types of products to market. And for the existing products that are in the marketplace, we're trying to bring better quality to better yield, effectively, it depends on where you are in the world. What is that critical metric of, in the US, it tends to be like weight. And in other parts of the world, it might be nutritional value or color. It just depends on the product and the category. But essentially, all farmers, whether they're an outdoor farm, an indoor farm, or a high-tech vertical farm, are trying to do more with less and get more out of using less resources. And the genetics themselves are very important in that. That happens in outdoor all the time. And most of the products that we grow as an industry inside of vertical farms are designed for outdoor environments, some of which have been adapted to greenhouse environments, but they're not specific. They deal with they're bred for disease resistance and climate. And in the vertical farm, we have the opportunity to look at genetics by environment, by management practice. So it's G by E by M, and the genetics are the seeds, the germplasm. The environment is highly controlled in a vertical farm, so much so that they actually the environment becomes a management practice. And as you look at that equation over time, there's this opportunity to evolve genetics through traditional breeding to use less energy, use less space, have better yield, have better color, have better nutrition, based on the fact that the environment is very tightly controlled. And that said, the point that I will make too is the vertical farm is not a static environment. I think that's often a misnomer. A farm, one part of the world might not be operating in the same way. And, two farms, they don't operate in the same range all the time. So there's definitely differences, but at Unfold, we're trying to help enable customers to grow better crops and grow better products for their customers and ultimately for consumers.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that and helping us understand. I mean, especially in relation to energy, the idea that you could, breed plants that you need less energy would be pretty incredible for vertical farming. I guess, like, what kind of difference are you really talking about that could be done? Do you guys have any predictions about how much of an improvement could be made, either in energy savings or yields or et cetera? I mean, maybe even based on what typically happens with genetics in other sectors, what could we potentially expect? I mean, the genetics piece is often referred to as a game changer for vertical farming, which obviously Unfold and your investors are betting on. But can you give us some idea of how much of a difference it might make?
I don't have a great metric for you, Henry, but I do think that there is a game-changing ability to bring crops into the marketplace that are specifically bred and have improvements to the bottom line that can make impact. Whether that's a 5% or 10%, it could be yield, or it could be quality, consistency, ability to tolerate, different environments. What if you could run a plant? What if you could run a vertical farm at slightly higher humidity levels and the plant had the same performance issues? That is an example of needing less mechanical, energy to pull it out, to pull moisture out of the air and have great results. I think that's where the fine tuning is going to happen. And, it's around energy, it's around quality, product specifications, and broadening the product specs that can go out into the marketplace. So it has all of those embodied in the promise of what can happen on the genetic side.
Yeah, well, nowadays, leafy greens are being grown by vertical farms pretty much in every place in the world, it seems. But you mentioned a couple of crops that might be coming to the market, like cucumbers or peppers and tomatoes, I believe you said. So, going back to sort of what James talked about with the evolution of vertical farming, do you think that those products are going to be also commercialized for vertical farms? And what's the role of breeding in achieving that?
Yeah, those products don't come to market, in my opinion, without breeding. And that's, I think, a real critical differentiator for us at Unfold is that we're working to bring those products to market for vertical farms in a very controlled environment. And in those crops, specifically, things that you would typically think of as indeterminate vine crops as their production method in high wire Dutch glasshouse style growing, that the form factor of that is not really conducive to a vertical farm. And there are still fully indoor tomato operations that are running high wire. And maybe that works. Maybe there is some point in the future where that works, but I think that there's opportunities to change the stature of the plants, to use different product categories to still bring that flavor in a more friendly fashion to put it into a building. But I bring no assumptions to how those products are. We are looking at them at our R&D facility to sort of understand what is possible, and then also realizing that there is a huge amount of capital that needs to come and build the farms of the future to be able to grow products that are of a different, product class than lettuce. I think that there's definitely more out there, but it does take time.
Yeah, and I think the whole objective of the sector, at least from its beginning, was, okay, look, we're trying to build farms that grow more with less and are resilient to climate change. We see climate change continuing to affect agriculture. We see conflicts. We see the pandemic. So all of that interest in that mission has sort of continued. But we also see people repeating the same mistakes of the past and not necessarily the most collaborative industry out there. Dan, you've been around. You've seen so much of that. I mean, what's your take on what would be needed to really solve these problems from a collaboration perspective?
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, if you look at agriculture, it's a reasonably collaborative environment. And one farm's success doesn't guarantee another farm's failure. And in my mind, coming out of the growing side, I always wanted to have more deep conversations, but the way in which the industry evolved, obviously, sort of created incentives where those conversations were often isolated. So you do, Henry, you see this. A lot of people are making the same mistake simultaneously in different parts of the world. And I don't have a magic solution for this. But I think that there's a need to be collaborative, to go and talk and to share what you can, knowing that all of us might learn something, so it's obviously a balance. We all know that we have investors out there and there's intellectual property, but the more we can share, the more, like for a company like Unfold, that we can help solve problems in the industry. So that's kind of an open call to,
I think it's an interesting paradox, right? Because we're talking about the evolution of the sector. We're talking about exponential tech, more data, we're developing more quickly, but then simultaneously we're all working in silos, or not all of us, but many of us working in silos, not collaborating, right? So we're missing that whole benefit of collaboration to actually achieve more evolution and exponential growth, which I think is interesting. It's like we're helping ourselves in one way and hurting ourselves in another way. So interesting to hear your thoughts on that, Dan. Thank you so much. Let's go over to you, Eric. You've been waiting very patiently. We appreciate you for doing that. But your topic is also quite interesting from an operations perspective, and also talking about automation. Labor continues to be a fluctuating and difficult cost for all farms, CEA included, vertical farming included. So can you tell us about some of the biggest challenges you've been working on between all the teams you've worked at, some impressive companies, and what do some of the best teams do well here, and what are some of the mistakes that you continue to see repeated on the operations automation side?
Yeah, for those that don't know, I joined Plenty shortly after they had raised that large Series B from SoftBank, and that was largely utilized to draw and build a very substantial engineering organization within the company. And I joined just after that as part of the grow team, and really quickly found a niche, kind of managing grow systems, doing really extensive data collection, and then providing that feedback to the engineering team. So as my career developed there, I became more and more of a liaison between the operations team, and eventually was responsible for the commissioning of successively large systems, eventually culminating with the system that's in South San Francisco now, which was kind of like the prototype for the Compton facility. So a ton of experience working with engineers and kind of trying to translate what growers are seeing into requirements that engineering can take back to their side and then design around. And I think, you know, there's a lot of differences between the ways growers and engineers will approach problems. And I feel like growers, and I include myself in this, are very comfortable working off intuition and off anecdotal experiences, where engineers really need things well-defined and typically want a lot of data driving decision making. But understanding the pros and cons to both, you know, that I feel like there's a lot of trust required for that collaboration to succeed, and really putting yourself in the shoes of your counterpart there. So the engineers who are willing to come into the farm really take a vested interest in what was going on and participate and understand the challenges the growers were going through. And likewise, the growers who could understand what the engineers were really asking for when they were probing or doing some of their diligence as far as data collection, you know, could find a common language and really succeed. And I think a lot of the tension arose, not just at Plenty. I think this is common across the industry, when some of that, when one side could tend to dominate the other. And I think really both sides are needed to get to a solution for the industry. And the more we all recognize that, I think the better the solution set will be.
What's the takeaway there, Eric? I mean, I think it's such an important point, right? The growers often are not valued to the extent that engineers are in this very sexy, high-tech Silicon Valley funded vertical farming space. But, you know, the growers are super critical to this. I certainly hear from growers that are not listened to, and they complain about that. But what's the balance there? What does the ideal company look like that balances the importance of engineering, considering it's so tech heavy, and the importance of the plants and growing them? Give us some takeaway that the audience can benefit from, and how to balance that.
Yeah. I think, honestly, I think it comes from leadership and management. And it's not to say that I haven't experienced that, because I think there is, you know, in places I've been, there is a concerted effort to give growers a voice. But often I think the way companies are capitalized, you kind of alluded to this, it's going to be very results driven. And the more growers and that side of the company can be brought into the decision-making process, and specifically the goal-setting process of what the organization is being steered towards, and not just asked to come in and fix maybe a solution that didn't work, the better the success is going to be for that organization.
Okay, and so tell us about Zordi. Is this something that you've navigated, and what's sort of the tech growing stack that you're solving?
Yeah, so the company was founded by Gilbu Lee, and she's a PhD, a roboticist and computer scientist from the University of Washington. And then she was teamed up with Casey Call, who was previously the head grower at Plenty. And that's kind of that dichotomy that I described, where, you know, they're working hand in hand. And the focus of our company is to develop automation solutions that are really geared towards smaller scale facilities. And you know, we're right now focused on greenhouse technology, both on the environmental management side, but also robotic solutions for cultivating, harvesting, and packing soft fruits, specifically strawberries to start.
And you've been in the sector, you know, across multiple different companies, as you mentioned, Plenty, I think Square Roots too, some others. So like, what are some of the observations that you've seen in the evolution of these companies, or the evolution of the sector and the way that these companies are approaching it?
Yeah, so I think, you know, I've had the benefit of working, like you said, at 3 or 4 companies now, is already being my 4th. And at each one, there's kind of a very specific approach, and a very unique tailored approach. In each case with Square Roots, you have the kind of the smaller scale containerized solution that is a vertical implementation. At Plenty, there's a very similar approach to growing, but obviously way more scaled up, talking about tens of thousands of square feet of production space. And then at Local Bounty, we worked on a hybridized system, which was part vertical propagation that would then feed into deep water culture grow system with an extensive automation setup after that. So, think packaging and other post-harvest. So I think it's given me a wide view, and I've also had the opportunity to sort of see firsthand internal technology development, where at a place like Plenty, all the technology is being built in-house, that's hardware and software included. And then a place like Local Bounty, where they're much more focused on sourcing proven existing technologies. And I think that some of the other panelists have described, it's a lack of collaboration that I think is kind of hampering the industry a little bit. I don't know what the solution to that is, but I think that as more and more investors are drawn to the space, we might see some consolidation, which would break down the barriers between different companies and different innovators in the space.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and I agree with your prediction on consolidation as well. What I think it's really interesting what you said about companies developing their own IP, and those that are being integrators. I mean, I think the trend is more going towards integrating, right? And companies are saying, okay, this journey of reinventing all of agriculture in-house is a lot more difficult, a lot more expensive than it seems. And there are companies out there that are solving key parts of automation technology better than we are. Do you agree with that? Do you think that's the direction that most operators or most companies are going?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's like, in hindsight, I think it's easy to say, well, or ask the question, which is, why did people take that on? And, today where there are so many other, I think it's partly that, but it's
fundraising,
like,
right?
I think 5 or 6 years ago, there weren't necessarily reliable partners and vendors in some of these spaces, especially if you had a very unique system the way Plenty did. So in some ways they were forced into they were not forced, but we took on the challenge of developing a lot of that in-house. I think about Artemis as and their merger with Iunu. That's a really great solution, but it didn't exist 5 years ago. And if you wanted something like that, which the Plenty set system required, you had to build it on your own. So not to discredit your point, but I think that, I'm glad we're at a point in the industry today where there's so many great companies that are providing so many awesome services and, lighting controls, harvesting equipment, post-harvest packaging, quality control equipment, vision systems, sensing platforms. You're in a better position today to go out and kind of piece together your ideal system than you would have been half a decade ago.
That's going to be interesting to see how that affects valuations in the future, as investors are seeing that these are really farms and their valuations are going to be based on their sales of their product as opposed to unique technology companies. So I think it's going to be very interesting to watch how that goes.
Yeah, and I think the pace of expansion, the types of returns people expect when they're making investments in these companies should start to reflect that a little more accurately versus the history of expecting a company's progress to resemble like what you're describing, a software company or other types of technology.
Very interesting. Well, thank you, Eric. Okay, so let's get into some rapid fire questions to all of our panelists. We talked about sort of what's evolved over the past decade to get here, covering genetics, breeding, and energy, automation, operations, so lots of key topics. But James, over to you. What's your bold prediction for the sector 5 years from now?
My bold prediction is that I think that it'll be commonly understood that vertical farms will be the predominant technology for growing diverse, like the type of variety in leafy greens and vegetables and some fruits that consumers demand today, especially in urban areas.
The majority in 5 years?
No, the majority of people will start seeing. I think there'll be much more investment going to vertical farms. We're going to
be aware of it.
they're going to be aware that the technology is moving in that direction. Right now, I think for years we've had this sense that, you know, greenhouses, and there is a place for greenhouses, there's a place for lots of different types of growing methods, but I think in these higher value crops, and especially in markets that demand lots of variety, that's the key, is for types of markets to demand lots of varieties, that it's just going to be preferred, it's going to be the more profitable technology for meeting that demand.
See the impact of that. I think there's about 45 hectares of vertical farming space globally now, so much smaller than greenhouses, and the energy demand for those vertical farms quite significant. So we'll see over the next 5 years if that happens, where the energy is sourced from and what that impact might be.
I go back to the electric car thing. 10 years ago, you barely saw electric cars on the road, and now it's a foregone conclusion that it's just a better technology, and so the industry is moving in that direction. There's still far more combustion engines, but we can all see the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still some controversy and debate over the sustainability benefits of electric cars, and their overall impact, which is the long-term objective of our sector as well, is to actually be not only more resilient but more sustainable. So we'll have to face that music at some point. Dan, what's your bold prediction for the next 5 years?
My bold prediction for the next couple of years, going out to 5 years, is that the concept that I like to refer to as yield on cost will be very important. And yield is, what do you get out of the money that you put in? And I think that there will be a rebalancing of how farms are capitalized and how investors want to see the rates of return and the balancing of risk against where the money is going. And these high capex vertical farms are, over time going to work out the unit economics. And once that yield on cost is fully identified, and I'm not talking about EBITDA, I'm talking about dropping it all the way down to the bottom of the P&L to start to understand what are you actually getting out of this method of growing, and how competitive is it compared to a glass house and even traditional. And I think once that happens, we start to see a little bit better picture. It's a little less hype, and it's a little bit more of, we're quote unquote selling a tractor in the farming business. This is a tool for production that can be done locally, and it has a yield that has return on it. And if that is better, you start to attract institutional capital at large scale. And that's when your cost of capital drops enough to scale and compete against other methods of production. So, the most simple thing, Henry, is that at some point we're going to cross a line, and I hope that happens sooner than 5 years, but I think it's going to take a little bit of time, where the majority of vertical farms are in total selling their produce in the marketplace, and at a cost that's reasonable, and then also at an internal cost of goods that's less than their actual sale price in the market. So there is margin being made, and therefore it becomes investable for something outside of kind of the current investment paradigm that we're in right now.
Eric, what about you, real quick?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with everything that's been said so far as the bold predictions. I think to go a step further on what Dan kind of mentioned there, venture capital has kind of taken its shot in some degrees at backing a vertical farming firm. But I still think there's plenty of money outside of venture capital that exists, and it could be probably private equity. It could be more like institutional and family offices. But I think kind of like the end game here, as Dan's sort of describing, is like you might see some public partnerships and people starting to really understand that we're building public infrastructure, and like that's really required at a massive scale as we start to transition the food system to a more sustainable version. So I think that you'll start to see more and more public investment in the industry, in the technology, but there's going to need to be some vetting, and the companies are going to need to turn the corner on the profitability like Dan described.
Very active. I'm seeing this red button highlight with the questions coming in. So James, Dan, and Eric, if you want to tackle any of those in writing, you're welcome to use that feature. But Agritecture is going to get into quick Q&A in a second here. But first, I wanted to mention we do this because we want to share a lot of knowledge, right? We're trying to enable and encourage the sector. It's why we find incredible panelists like these three to talk about this top. Montel, who we've been proud to work with at Agritecture to showcase their racking technology and the quality that they're able to provide that around vertical farming solutions. And they do work with James, as was mentioned. Racking is something that's very important. And essentially the concept of Montel is that you can do more with less space, right? So they have high quality mobile racking solutions for vertical farming, for cannabis, for all kinds of crops that you would need. And they're able to maximize your space. Extremely critical, whether you're a small farm or a big farm, Montel is there to help you out. And you can certainly contact them and talk to them, whether it's through social media or their website. I invite you to look at their Instagram to check out some of their projects, their videos, but also feel free to reach out to them directly so you can get a quote and you can talk to them. Montel is also a member of the Agritecture Partner Network, noted on our Agriculture Designer software, and also a place where you can compare the costs, economics, et cetera, yield, water of greenhouses and vertical farms, which is a topic that was talked about a lot today. So a place where you can get that data and that information. But let's move on into some of the questions and let's see if there's ones we want to tackle here. I think this first one was Sam, was probably in reference to your kickoff, James. I don't know if you have familiarity with that one, but let's talk about Gary Jones's, right? Gary Jones's question of sustainability that's thrown out a lot in this sector. Do any of your panelists, any of us have an answer to this one about the idea of a life cycle analysis that's been done? If not, I can answer this one. Okay, so there are some internal life cycle analyses that have been done by various companies, but they haven't published them, probably because vertical farming tends to lose in most of that analysis. There has not been a third-party public assessment that has been done. Agritecture has done assessments like this as well for corporations, and we do find that the carbon footprint, at least from that perspective, is bigger for vertical farms, but a full-on life cycle analysis that's published hasn't been done yet. I know that Cornell has been working on one for various years, so if I had to give some advice, I would say to watch out for that. But certainly, if we see from some of the recent sustainability posts, you can look at the in-farm sustainability report, you can look at the Square Roots post from Tobias Peggs about their sustainability, but certainly the embodied energy of the equipment in these vertical farms, which are very equipment heavy, is a significant portion of the overall carbon footprint in a life cycle analysis that makes them quite a bit different from outdoor farms. Let's get into, let's see which other one we want to do. Root vegetables. Let's go to you, Dan. Has there anybody work on root vegetables and vertical farming? Maybe Eric has some thoughts too.
Yeah, it can be done. It's just all about profitability, and root vegetables tend to be not always that profitable in that context. But yeah, I've grown some interesting looking radishes and done a little bit of work on them early on. But I think you get into, it gets into complexity, we'll say, and higher value crops has been the motivator. I'm not saying that it's impossible and it can't be done. It certainly can. It's just what's the intent of the produce that you're producing.
Okay, yeah, I would agree with that. Absolutely. This question from Christian Murray is one we get a lot for this sector, comparing hydroponic to soil-based grown methods. This is a question we get almost every single webinar. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? If not, I'll give an answer. I think one of the primary drivers for nutrition is freshness, is how fresh the product is to the customer. I think there are also other benefits, of course, with fertilizers and what's in the soil and micronutrients. But I would say that freshness, especially in leafy greens and perishable products, is probably the primary driver for a lot of the nutrition. So I would say vertical farming and local greenhouses can provide that quite well. Let's see here. James, we sort of talked about this, but Justine is asking about alternative energy sources. You want to talk about renewables a little bit, how realistic that is for vertical farming now? You mentioned it briefly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I mean, again, it goes back to storage, right? Battery, it's like just to summarize a little bit, like the sun, you really get about 8 hours of useful sunlight a day to generate energy from. and then you grow at, say, like lettuce that requires 16 hours of light, you have this deficit of 8 hours where you can't provide light. I can't provide energy because the sun's not out. So you really need to store that energy. And the challenge is that battery storage is really expensive right now. And hydrogen is another thing people are looking at, but it's still really expensive. There's a lot of great research going on, including, with storage, with genetics, with lots of things. So I think we're eventually gonna hit that. But so short answer, yes. I think those energy sources will be feasible and useful one day, but we're just not there yet. Really, storage is the main thing we have to unlock. That's the enabling technology.
Thank you for that, James. Really appreciate that. Let's go over this question from Henry Behrman, which is interesting, which talks about, prior planning prevents poor performance, the 5 Ps there. How much of your facility design and SOP planning should be developed during upfront versus dialing in the process later on? I really like this question, obviously, because agriculture spends a lot of time and we value planning a lot. But I want to go over to you, Eric. What are your thoughts on that, based on your extensive experience in working with a lot of, building and flying at the same time operations?
Yeah, this is obviously a huge challenge given kind of like the capital expectations we've talked about in the past, and companies will set milestones and they end up being under a deadline. Obviously, as much as you can standardize in advance is optimal. I would not suggest deploying a facility or even a system without extensive testing in advance. I don't know. I wish that maybe you could message me offline if there's more specifics or detailed questions you have.
I mean, I guess do you wish you had spent more time, or do you wish the company you'd worked with spent more time planning versus diving in and observing?
No. Well, I think in an R&D system, some of that's to be expected, and I don't. I wouldn't want to hold back the pace of innovation or testing in that sense. But, when you start to talk about 40, 50,000 square feet of production space, I think what I have seen in certain cases, like people will deploy a system that honestly doesn't solve, that there's some, first principle that's been missed, and whether it's how the product is going to move through a facility, whether the environment can maintain the set points that have been spec'd, you can deploy a huge amount of capital on a system that can't produce food. And I think that can be, it's going to set back that company a ton, but it's also going to have implications across the industry. So if there's anyone listening out there, just urge a little restraint, and you really want to make sure that everything's lined up before you start putting food on people's plates, I guess.
Dan, can I get an amen from you, or do you disagree?
Yeah, I mean, this is like, just to use a golf term, this is like drive for show versus putt for dough. Like it all comes down to ops, and it all comes down to the short game of it's not exciting, but incremental improvements on your production line drop dollars to the bottom line more effectively than a lot of other ways to do it. The way that I looked at it with FarmBox is we've committed capital, and I know that it's not perfect, but we are going to squeeze every drop out of that as through our operations and through our process to get as much yield for the dollars that we spent through that system. And it's easy to continue to tweak and change and switch out equipment, but it gets really expensive. So at some point you got to commit and make the most of it and figure out how to optimize. And that takes a while, but it's farming at the end of the day. We're growing things, and that's how you get it done.
Yeah.
Okay, Dan, thank you for that. Yes, go ahead.
If I can add one more thing. I think, food production poses a lot of unique challenges that other manufacturing environments don't. So to go in and change a system in any major way after it's been deployed is extremely disruptive, especially if you've got crops in there, and that's going to represent a huge disruption to your supply chain. So even you may take a grow room or a production line off for a week of changes, but if you have to totally empty that system, it could represent a month of production or more. And if you have customers who are relying on you, it's very disruptive to the overall business.
Fantastic. So we've got Patrick Duffy here from Minneapolis, who's I think planning a farm. He's getting started. So he's curious about water usage or resources and challenges or costs there. Patrick, on our software, you can estimate the water use, but I guess Dan, water, how big of an issue is it or a cost? Can you just maybe share that?
Well, I'll give you experience on two sides of this. One, water can be a great asset to you. It also can be a real big challenge. So putting it down the drain has caused issues at more than one CEA facility. So that's a challenge. And the second thing is like, reverse osmosis, like how good is the water where you're working? And do you have to dump some proportion of the water right down the drain, just by very nature of how you get water into your system? And so, I'm not a water resource expert, but it's one of those things that I think it's inherently discussed as, vertical farming is so water efficient, but it can run into these situations where it's not so water efficient, especially when you consider equipment washing and wash down and the impact of reverse osmosis. So water is a big challenge and something that you really have to be, depending on your regulatory environment, very aware of and ahead of, so that you don't run into issues with basically what you're doing with it in process and afterwards.
Okay, thank you. That's actually very, very helpful as well to understand that. I guess there's some questions about where the biggest opportunities are in the sector. Let's wrap up there. Okay, so I don't want to tell the market size, but where do you think some of the greatest opportunities are for the audience to make a difference in vertical farming?
I think something that people don't necessarily think about often when they're thinking about grow systems is the amount of light that's wasted. Even though LEDs are quote unquote efficient, you're putting out a ton of light that isn't actually being absorbed by the plant. And James cited one reason, which is because the crops are, transpiring at different times and not constantly. Another is just like the configuration and layout of your grow system. And that's a huge one that Local Bounty is trying to tackle. But yeah, I think the solution he cited, which is there a way to integrate some biofeedback, which is like, is the plant using the light or not? Let's have that be our controller versus a timer, is what I would say is maybe the biggest opportunity in the industry and is what's going to unlock a lot.
That's really interesting.
Especially as you get into complex crops, fruit and crops.
Very interesting. Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I would just agree. I would say the biofeedback is something that's really interesting because it goes back to the planning question too. Some of the audience had. We are like manufacturing. We decide manufacturing facilities. They they design these facilities knowing that they're going to learn a lot from the production process and continuously improve it. And that's one of the first things you do when you're designing a manufacturing facility. And what's missing in vertical farming is knowing how well the plant's doing, right? And so that I can learn continuously. And so I think that's the thing one of the things I'm most excited about is just in real time being able to understand how decisions I'm making are affecting the plant, and so we can learn faster. And that's so software and just experimentation and plant science is a really interesting. There's some really interesting innovations in those spaces.
Well, thank you so much. I want a huge virtual round of applause for our panelists, Dan from Unfold, Eric from Zordi, and James from Bolt Server. So all amazing companies hitting incredible aspects of the evolution of vertical farming and being part of it. Of course, we want to send a big thank you to our sponsors, Montel, for making this possible and being so motivated to share knowledge as well as providing their racking solutions to the sector. And finally, Agritecture. If you enjoyed this, trust me, you're going to love the rest of our content, including our newsletter. Just go to agritecture.com, scroll to the bottom and subscribe, and you'll get the latest blog posts, updates on upcoming webinars and events. And if you're not sick of the sound of my voice, you can join us in Amsterdam next week for Green Tech. Many of us will be there, and I'll be hosting on the Vision stage and moderating most of the sessions. So I hope to see you there. Thank you so much for everyone, your great questions. If we didn't get to your questions, you can feel free to contact Agritecture. We'll do our best to answer them for you. And again, thank you so much for registering, attending, and of course, round of applause for our amazing panelists. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.